Log on to patreon.com/Dane Calloway or paypal.me/Dane Calloway to support me, my channel, and my content. Any amount is much appreciated, and I humbly thank you.
Our fathers, sweat, blood, and tears built this country. Our fathers and our mothers worked from can't see morning to can't see night with no pay to build the economy of the South, to fuel the economy and the industrial revolution of the North. Mother, wife, sister, auntie, baby. We fought in all America's wars for a freedom that we have never achieved. We fought in the Revolutionary War that made America independent of England. But we don't have any independence ourselves. We are dependent on white people to do for us what we have earned the right to do for ourselves. We fought in the Spanish-American War. We fought in the War of 1812. We fought in the Civil War on the side of the North and the South. We died right alongside of those fighting to maintain slavery. And those who said they were trying to maintain the Union, but in any case, after the Union was maintained, it was back to business as usual. We had congressmen and senators, and we had government representation. But the Night Riders and the KKK took it all away from us. Said, we don't want no niggers in the Congress. We don't want no niggers in high political office. So they killed us. They hung us. They burned us. And when they got in trouble, they called us again to fight in a Jim Crow army. Some of the older ones here that were in World War I, you know you fought Germany. But the German prisoners of war were treated better than the black soldiers who fought for America against Germany. Talk to me. Hitler rose again. World War II. Black men died at Pearl Harbor. Black men died in Guadalcanal, in the Solomon Islands, in the Philippines, at Iwo Jima. Black men died in North Africa fighting the Germans. Black men died at Anzio Beach, at Palermo, at Naples, to free Rome, to free Paris, to free Europe. Damn it! We died to build America. And America has rebuilt Germany and Japan, and the nigger is still suffering and dying in the streets of America.
In today's society of America, it is called the Black Wall Street, but in the early 1900s, it was known as the Negro Wall Street. This nickname was given to the street called Greenwood Avenue of North Tulsa, Oklahoma. Due to the complexity of segregation, copper-colored people, or rather Aborigines of America, were forced to shop, spin, and live inside of a 35 square block radius only, in an area called the Greenwood District, where the dollar of the American Aborigines circulated for up to 13 months within their own community. This methodology evolved into the production of multiple Black-owned and operated businesses that prospered tremendously, single-handedly becoming the most highly favorable and well-respected land in America. Admired by thousands and consistently visited by millions of fellow Aborigines from all across the country, this landmass of Tulsa came a very long way after the Civil War ended in 1865. In fact, between the years of 1828 and 1886, Oklahoma became the resettlement destination for nearly 40 or more Southern Indian clans or nations and tribes alike. According to the LOC, the Indian Removal Act was passed by the House and the Senate in the same day of May 26, 1830, then immediately signed into law by then President Andrew Jackson just 2 days later. This sole authorization made it official for Jackson to grant unsettled lands to the native Indians in exchange for their current Indian territories. So, from the years of 1828 to 1886, the commonly known Choctaw, Chickasaw, Cherokee, Seminole, and Creek tribes, not to exclude the many uncommonly known Indian nations of the southeast regions of America, were all affected by Jackson's malicious replication of immigration with an E. According to historical records, both the U.S. government and the Indians signed many treaties pertaining to slave liberation and the reconstruction of their livelihoods during the mid-1800s, allotting lands of approximately 40 to 250 acres to native Indians, giving off yet the most accurate answer as to why there were nearly 7,000 copper-colored Americans residing within the newly established Indian territories of Oklahoma by 1870. Oklahoma was considered to have the most all-Black communities throughout America during that time period. These generous Black communities welcomed even more freed slaves to come reside in the lands of Oklahoma, more specifically in the city of Tulsa. But many can recall the city of Tulsa as being a heavily segregated racist hellhole, having been occupied by both Black and white Americans. Copper-colored people were not allowed to live amongst the whites as equals, nor patronize white businesses in the entire city of Tulsa. But that did not stop the Aborigines from flourishing on their own. Red Fork is documented as the small southwest town of Tulsa for having discovered oil and single-handedly booming the city of Tulsa. This happened shortly after most of the violent Indian rebellion subsided, and the Indians were forced to cede the majority of their Indian territories in Oklahoma to thousands of white non-Indian citizens that were allowed to be identified as Indians under the color of law. In one of my previous videos called The Untold Truth about the $5 Indians, I stated that the U.S. government created a separate freedmen's list specifically designed to rule out all copper-colored Indians from receiving any newly established benefits and land allotments. Now, shortly after that, the U.S. government listed all full-blooded indigenous aborigines of America as black or colored as their classification of race documented inside of the 1900 census, while simultaneously, white U.S. citizens were allowed to become identified as Indians by merely paying the Dawes Roll Commission a whopping total of just $5 for each white adult and child to be listed on the Dawes Roll. From the late 1880s to April 1st of 1902, public notices were passed around detailing that other, quote, claimants can legally make their cases for freedmen enrollment. This motion single-handedly allowed all white citizens the rights to legally cede the Indian lands of America, reparations, plus the optimized benefits having been set in stone by way of many previous U.S. and Indian treaties. Multiple public schools and all other industrialized institutions are keeping this open secret in the dark for obvious reasons. There were 2 Caucasoid physicians that were credited with the discovery of the oil in Red Fork. The oil was discovered on Creek Indian Territory in Oklahoma, but by the way of the $5 Indian enrollment aftermath, the wife of Dr. J.C.W. Bland, Sue Bland, was awarded with Indian land allotments, and it just so happened to be located on the acres she owned. Dr. Fred Clinton and Sue's husband, Dr. Bland, produced Tulsa's very first oil well on June 25, 1901, rapidly thriving the city's wealth, with bank deposits totaling just over $65 million, according to historical records of 1920. Keep that in mind. Of course, black people did not benefit from this at all. In fact, due to the overwhelming amounts of racism and segregation, they developed their own completely separate business district and community, which also became prosperous and legendary. The circulation of the black dollar within their own community helped with producing forms of mental stimulation, innovating self-pride, self-sufficiency, and self-determination amongst all black Americans in Tulsa. The Greenwood Business District, beginning at the intersection of Greenwood Avenue and Archer Street, became so successful and vibrant that during his visit, Booker T. Washington dubbed it as the, quote, Negro Wall Street. Having their own bus line and 2 high schools, a hospital, 2 newspapers, 2 theaters, 3 drugstores, 4 hotels, a public library, and 13 churches. In addition to that, there were over 150 2- to 3-story brick commercial buildings that housed clothing and grocery stores, cafes, rooming houses, nightclubs, and a large number of professional offices hosted by black doctors, lawyers, and dentists. Tulsa's progressive black community had some of the city's most elegant brick houses and mansions in all of Oklahoma, completely well furnished with china, fine linens, beautiful furniture, and even grand pianos.
Anybody who wishes for the good old days probably doesn't remember what the good old days were really like. Because in 1921, the nation suffered coast to coast from hate, discrimination, arrogance, and those were probably the underlying reasons. They manifested themselves in organizations like the Ku Klux Klan. But you can't blame the riot on one or two or three specific incidents. The environment is what caused it. You have to keep in mind that in 1921, the majority of the Oklahoma legislature were Klansmen. Almost every city and county official in Tulsa County, Oklahoma, was elected with either support of the Klan or they were Klansmen themselves. In those days, the Klan would have parades in downtown Tulsa, wearing their white sheets and their pointy little hats to fit their pointy little heads, that would last 4 to 5 hours in length. Now visualize the number of people that were involved in a parade that would last 4 to 5 hours. And all these people came from Tulsa. When you had a parade in Tulsa, a lot of people come in from other counties. But you also have to remember that 1925, there were 5 million card-carrying Ku Klux Klansmen in this country. So what was going on in Tulsa was probably the same thing that was going on in an awful lot of other cities. And if the riot hadn't happened in Tulsa, it probably would have happened someplace else. The difference between Tulsa and some other city is that we know how bad it got. And where we've gone since then has been a mark of our progress. Has been a mark of our progress. Has been a mark of our progress. When you have thousands of white men coming back from World War I, bringing back Souvenir Lewis, Spandau, and Browning submachine guns, and a variety of other weapons that they brought back from the battlefield. And then they can't find jobs. And the power structure within the city at that time, as was occurring in other cities, would enlist them in the Ku Klux Klan and blame their problems on Jews, African Americans, and Catholics. It was a simple answer to a complex problem for simple people. Meanwhile, they could stand in downtown Tulsa and look at the mansions in Little Africa, in the Black Wall Street, and seethe.
During the early morning of May 31st, 1921, a 19-year-old young black professional by the name of Dick Rowland worked as a shoe shiner in the downtown area of Tulsa. There were no restroom facilities where he performed his duties, so Rowland had permission to use the restroom located on the top floor of the nearest building. Of course, he had to use the manually operated elevator to reach the top floor. And according to all statements made by Black American survivors during this time period, it was very likely that Rowland had his head down while riding the elevator, like most black people did during those times of segregation. In the early 1990s, Tulsa riot survivor, 93-year-old Jimmy Lilly Franklin, stated the details as, quote, "He was a shoe shine boy. When he stepped onto the elevator, that elevator was not quite aligned with the floor, so he tripped and he fell and grabbed the little 17 or 18-year-old white girl who was the elevator operator. And the people who were standing there getting off of the elevator or waiting to get on the elevator said that he had attacked her." Dick Rowland was arrested at approximately 10 a.m. that same morning. And then later on in the afternoon, a white-owned and operated newspaper company called the Tulsa Tribune wrote an article detailing what happened. But they stated many false information and details in order to provoke yet another lynching. In fact, at the end of the article, it stated, quote, "It looks like there will be another lynching in Tulsa tonight." This yellow journalism went as far as naming Dick Rowland as Diamond Dick, stating that he attempted to attack a poor young white orphan girl who worked as an elevator operator to pay her way through college. The article also stated that she had scratches on her hands and face. The official background of this young girl did come out to the public after further investigation, confirming that she had no scratches anywhere on her body and she was in fact not an orphan. She just recently deserted her husband in Kansas City, and she was served with divorce papers in Tulsa just 2 months prior to this incident. But unfortunately, this news was released too late. The Tulsa Tribune newspaper company played a major role of the hundreds of lynchings of black people in the city of Tulsa and all across Oklahoma. It was the main go-to source for local and national news during that time period. Instigating, fibbing, and provoking a murder of an innocent black human being due to the malicious efforts of yellow journalism were their derogative tactics to sell more newspapers than anybody in Oklahoma. There were talks that a lynching would happen that day of May 31st, and later on that evening, thousands of Klansmen were escorted by a mob of white police officers of other counties in Oklahoma to the county jail, demanding Rowland's release so they could take justice into their own hands. During this time period, it was not illegal to lynch any black people. Hundreds of other lynchings happened previously throughout all of Oklahoma. But this time, many of the black male citizens of the Greenwood District took a stand. They gathered their heavily high-powered weapons and met with the white mob that outnumbered them outside of the county jail. Shortly after a few harsh words exchanged, calamitous events resulted in multiple casualties of black men. Those that could have survived did not receive any medical attention due to the white mob preventing the paramedics from rescuing them, so they bled to death. The violence did not stop there. In fact, it escalated rapidly into the night and throughout the very next day. The black citizens of the Greenwood District had their electricity shut off, and their telephone services were removed. Mobs of armed whites were looting the businesses and the houses of the middle-class black citizens of Greenwood, taking money, clothes, furniture, and anything else that they thought was of value. Mostly all of these things they never had before due to the poor conditions of their own communities. Once they were done looting one place, they'll set it on fire. This was all done out of complete greed and jealousy towards the wealthier black citizens of Tulsa. Martial law was then declared around 11 a.m. on July 1st, and the National Guard of Oklahoma arrived into town by train, heavily armed and shooting any black person at will. Multiple cars full of white mobsters and militants came flying into Greenwood. These cars had machine guns strapped to them, emptying hundreds of rounds of heavy ammunition into many business buildings and beautiful homes of the black citizens in the Greenwood District. And speaking of flying into Greenwood, these militants also bombed the houses and buildings by planes, immediately increasing the death toll to well over 6,000 innocent black Americans. Some of them were asleep and didn't have a clue. Others fought back but were immediately met by machine gun fire. And most took off running outside of the district, holding small infants, toddlers, and teenagers, while the sounds of bombs and heavy ammunition rang in their ears, overpowering the cries of their younger children while managing to make it at the hill, as survivors described it. But well more than half were executed before reaching the train tracks for safety. According to records held by way of the Information Act, there were members of the U.S. military, the National Guard, the Alphabet Boys, many police departments, and the KKK that were all involved from beginning to end. And to make matters worse, the black citizens were deemed at fault by the courts for all of what happened, justifying this massacre for those racist lunatics. History likes to keep this story a secret, so let's be sure that this truth gets told to the masses. For this was the American Holocaust of 1921. I'm just here to make you think.